Jake Morrison pressed his back against the cold metal wall of his small spacecraft. Red warning lights flashed all around him. The ship shook hard as another blast hit the outer hull. Through the small window he could see 3 massive alien ships surrounding his vessel like hungry wolves. "Come on, come on," Jake whispered to himself as he tried to fix the damaged control panel. Sparks flew from broken wires. The ship's computer kept repeating the same message over and over. Hull breach detected. Life support failing. Jake was a lieutenant in the Earth Colonial Fleet. He was only 28 years old, but he had already been on many dangerous missions. This time his job was simple. He was supposed to fly his small ship, the Pioneer's Edge, to the Sigma system and take pictures of enemy positions. It should have been an easy job. He was wrong. The alien ships belonged to the Zephyrian Empire. Jake had heard stories about these creatures. They looked like giant insects but walked on 2 legs like humans. They had 4 arms, hard shell-like skin, and large black eyes that never seemed to blink. Most scary of all, they never showed any emotion. They followed orders without question and never gave up in a fight. Another blast shook the ship. This time, Jake heard the terrible sound of metal tearing apart. The main engine was dead. The weapons were offline. He had no choice left. "This is Lieutenant Jake Morrison of the Earth Colonial Fleet," he said into his radio. "My ship is damaged and surrounded. If anyone can hear this message, tell Earth that the Zephyrians have moved their fleet into the Sigma system. They are planning something big." Jake looked at the picture of his crew on the control panel. There were 5 other people on this mission. They had been flying in separate ships to cover more ground. But 30 minutes ago, all their signals had gone quiet. Jake knew what that meant. He was the only one left alive. A new voice came through his radio. It did not sound human. The words were cold and flat, like a machine talking. "Human vessel, you will stop your engines and prepare to be taken aboard our ship. Any attempt to resist will result in your destruction." Jake laughed, but there was no joy in it. "My engines are already stopped thanks to you." He looked around his small ship one last time. There were family photos stuck to the walls, a half-eaten sandwich on the pilot's seat, and a book he had been reading during quiet moments. All the small things that made a place feel like home. The Zephyrian ship moved closer. It was so big that it blocked out the stars. Jake could see an opening in its side, like a giant mouth ready to swallow his tiny ship. Metal arms reached out and grabbed the Pioneer's Edge. There was nothing Jake could do to stop it. As his ship was pulled inside the alien vessel, Jake tried to stay calm. He had been trained for this situation, but training was different from the real thing. His heart was beating fast and his hands were shaking. He took deep breaths and tried to remember everything he had learned about the Zephyrians. The inside of the alien ship was dark and cold. Strange blue lights ran along the walls in patterns that hurt to look at. The air smelled like metal and something else Jake could not identify. It was not a pleasant smell. When his ship finally stopped moving, Jake heard heavy footsteps outside. The sound of cutting tools filled the air. The aliens were breaking into his ship. Jake stood up and straightened his uniform. If he was going to be captured, he would face it like a soldier. The door of his ship fell away with a loud crash. 3 Zephyrian soldiers stood in the opening. They were even more frightening in person than in the pictures Jake had seen. Each one was at least 7 feet tall. Their black eyes reflected the blue lights of their ship like mirrors. They wore dark armor that seemed to be part of their bodies. "Human, you will come with us," one of them said. Its voice was the same flat, emotionless tone Jake had heard on the radio. Jake walked slowly toward them. He kept his hands where they could see them. As he got closer, he noticed that the aliens smelled like old metal and something that reminded him of hospitals. It was not a good combination. 2 of the soldiers grabbed Jake's arms. Their grip was strong enough to hurt, but they were careful not to break anything. Jake realized they wanted him alive and in good condition. That was both good news and bad news. Good because he would live longer. Bad because it meant they had plans for him. They walked through long hallways filled with more blue lights. Jake tried to remember the path they took, but everything looked the same. The walls were smooth and curved like the inside of a giant pipe. There were no decorations, no signs, nothing that looked personal or human. Other Zephyrians watched as they passed. None of them showed any emotion. They just stared with their black eyes and then went back to their work. Jake felt like a strange animal being taken to a zoo. Finally, they reached a small room with metal walls and no windows. There was a hard bench attached to one wall and nothing else. The soldiers pushed Jake inside and stepped back. A wall of energy appeared across the doorway, trapping him inside. "You will wait here," one of the soldiers said. "Commander Vexthar will speak with you soon." Then they were gone and Jake was alone. He sat down on the bench and tried to think. He was alive, which was more than he had expected an hour ago, but he was also a prisoner on an enemy ship, probably heading toward the Zephyrian homeworld. Once he got there, his chances of ever seeing Earth again would be close to zero. Jake looked around his small cell. The walls were smooth metal with no visible joints or seams. The energy barrier at the door hummed softly. There was no obvious way to escape, but Jake was not ready to give up. Humans were good at finding solutions to impossible problems. It was one of the things that made them different from other species. He started to examine every inch of his prison, looking for anything that might help him later. As he worked, Jake thought about his crew and his family back on Earth. He had made them a promise to come home safely. He intended to keep that promise no matter what it took. Jake had been in the cell for 3 days when Commander Vexthar finally came to see him. The alien was different from the soldiers. He wore a long black coat over his armor, and his movements were more careful and controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried authority that made the other Zephyrians step back. "Human," Vexthar said, stopping just outside the energy barrier. "I am Commander Vexthar of the Hive Sovereign. You will answer my questions." Jake stood up slowly from the metal bench. His body was sore from sleeping on the hard surface, but he tried not to show it. "I'm Lieutenant Jake Morrison, Earth Colonial Fleet, serial number 7749 Delta." "We do not care about your numbers," Vexthar replied. "We want to know about your military bases in the Sigma system. How many ships does Earth have? Where are they hidden?" Jake looked straight into the alien's black eyes. "I can't tell you that information." Vexthar made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. "All creatures talk eventually, human. Your species is no different. We have studied your kind. You are weak and emotional. You will break like all the others." "Maybe," Jake said, "but not today." The commander studied Jake for a long moment. Then he turned to one of the guards. "Increase the cold in his cell. Reduce his food by half. We will see how long his stubbornness lasts." After they left, Jake felt the temperature in his cell begin to drop. He pulled his uniform jacket tighter around his body and started walking back and forth to stay warm. As he walked, he thought about what the commander had said. The aliens believed humans were weak and emotional. That was their mistake. During his 3 days in the cell, Jake had been busy. While pretending to sleep or sit quietly, he had been studying every detail of his prison. He found that the energy barrier had a small control panel hidden behind a cover plate near the door. The lights in the ceiling followed a pattern that repeated every 6 hours. Most important of all, he had noticed that the guards changed shifts at regular times and always followed the same routine. Jake had also been working on the metal bench. Using a small piece of broken plastic from his uniform, he had slowly scratched away at one of the bolts that held the bench to the wall. It was slow work, and he had to be careful not to let the guards see what he was doing. But after 3 days, the bolt was almost loose enough to remove. On his 4th night in the cell, Jake put his plan into action. He waited until the guards changed shifts at midnight. During the shift change, there was always a 5-minute period when no one was watching the security cameras. The new guards needed time to check their equipment and get settled. Jake quickly removed the loose bolt from the bench. It was small but heavy, made of some kind of alien metal. He had tested it earlier and found that it conducted electricity well. Now he used it to short-circuit the control panel for the energy barrier. Sparks flew from the panel and the lights in his cell went out. The energy barrier flickered and disappeared. Jake held his breath and listened. No alarms were going off yet, but he knew that would not last long. He stepped out of his cell and looked down the hallway. It was empty, just as he had hoped. Jake turned left and started running toward what he thought was the center of the ship. He had been counting steps and measuring distances during his trip to the cell 3 days ago. He had a rough idea of the ship's layout. Behind him, Jake heard the first alarm start to sound. Red lights began flashing in the hallways. The hunt had begun. Jake reached a junction where 3 hallways met. He could hear heavy footsteps coming from the direction he had just come from. The Zephyrian guards were fast, but they were also predictable. They would split up and search each hallway systematically. Jake chose the middle path and kept running. The alien ship was like a maze. Every hallway looked the same, with smooth curved walls and blue lights. But Jake had grown up in the crowded cities of Earth, where you had to be good at finding your way around confusing places. He used tricks his father had taught him as a child. Count your steps, remember unique details. Always know which direction you came from. Jake turned a corner and almost ran into two Zephyrian workers. They were carrying some kind of equipment, and were just as surprised to see him as he was to see them. Before they could react, Jake pushed past them and kept running. He heard them calling out behind him, but their voices were confused and slow. The humans were right about one thing, Jake thought as he ran. The aliens did follow predictable patterns. They were trained to expect certain types of behavior from their enemies. But Jake was not behaving like a typical prisoner. He was not trying to find weapons or fight his way to an escape pod. Instead, he was going deeper into the ship, toward the most protected areas. Jake found what he was looking for in a maintenance section of the ship. The Zephyrians had excellent technology, but like all technology, it needed to be maintained and repaired. Jake had studied engineering before joining the military, and he understood how most systems worked. He found the environmental control panel for his section of the ship. Using his knowledge of electronics and some educated guessing, Jake managed to reprogram the system. Within minutes, thick fog began pouring out of the air vents. The temperature controls went crazy, making some hallways very hot and others freezing cold. The lights began flashing in random patterns. Captain Crixnall, who was leading the search for Jake, spoke angrily into his communicator. "What is happening to our systems?" "Fix them immediately." "We are trying, Captain," came the reply. "But the human has somehow changed the programming. Our technicians cannot understand what he has done." This was exactly what Jake had hoped for. Humans and Zephyrians thought about problems in different ways. When human engineers designed something, they built in backup systems and alternative methods. When something broke, there were usually several ways to fix it. But Zephyrian technology was designed to work perfectly the first time. When it broke in unexpected ways, they had trouble adapting. Jake used the confusion to move deeper into the ship. He crawled through maintenance tunnels and service corridors that the aliens did not think to guard. These spaces were not designed for creatures as large as Zephyrians, so they assumed no one would use them. As he crawled through a particularly narrow tunnel, Jake could hear the voices of frustrated guards above him. They were arguing about search patterns and coordination. Their perfect system was falling apart because one human was not following the rules. Jake smiled to himself as he crawled toward an uncertain future. He was still trapped on an enemy ship, surrounded by creatures who wanted to capture or kill him. But for the first time since his capture, he felt like he had some control over his situation. The aliens thought they understood humans, but they were wrong. They had never met someone like Jake Morrison, and they were not prepared for the surprises he had in store for them. The tunnel ahead split into two directions. Jake paused to listen carefully. He could hear the sound of machinery coming from the left tunnel, and something that sounded like flowing water from the right. He made his choice and crawled toward the unknown, ready to face whatever came next. Jake crawled through the narrow tunnel for what felt like hours. His knees were scraped and his uniform was torn, but he kept moving forward. Behind him, he could still hear the voices of angry Zephyrian guards searching for him. They were getting closer, and Jake knew he was running out of time. The tunnel suddenly opened into a larger space. Jake carefully poked his head out and looked around. He was in some kind of storage room, filled with strange equipment and supplies. Everything was organized in perfect rows, just like everything else on the alien ship. But this room felt different somehow. The air was cleaner, and the lights were softer than in the rest of the ship. Jake climbed out of the tunnel and stretched his sore muscles. As he looked around the room, he noticed something unusual. There was a small door in the far wall that did not look like the other doors he had seen on the ship. This one was decorated with intricate patterns and seemed to be made of a different material. It almost looked like it was grown rather than built. Jake heard footsteps in the hallway outside the storage room. The guards were getting closer. He needed to find another hiding place quickly. The decorated door seemed like his only option, even though he had no idea where it led. Jake tried to open the door, but there was no handle or control panel that he could see. As he ran his hands over the surface looking for some way to activate it, his palm pressed against one of the decorative patterns. The door responded to his touch, glowing softly and sliding open with a quiet hissing sound. Beyond the door was a small chamber with what looked like a transport tube. Jake had seen similar devices in human spaceships, but this one was much more advanced. The walls of the chamber seemed to be alive, pulsing gently with soft light. Jake could hear the guards entering the storage room behind him. He had no choice but to step into the transport tube. As soon as Jake entered the tube, it activated automatically. The world around him became a blur of light and color. He felt like he was moving very fast, but there was no sensation of acceleration or movement. It was the strangest experience of his life. The transport stopped as suddenly as it had started. Jake found himself in a completely different part of the ship. The first thing he noticed was the silence. After days of hearing the constant hum of machinery and the sound of guards searching for him, the quiet was almost shocking. Jake stepped out of the transport tube and gasped at what he saw. He was standing in the most beautiful room he had ever seen. The walls were not the cold metal of the rest of the ship. Instead, they seemed to be made of some kind of living crystal that glowed with warm, soft light. The patterns in the walls moved slowly, like gentle waves on a calm ocean. The ceiling was high and curved, covered with what looked like stars. But as Jake watched, he realized they were not just lights. They were actual tiny points of energy that moved and danced in complex patterns. The air in the room smelled like flowers and rain, nothing like the metallic smell of the rest of the ship. In the center of the room was a raised platform surrounded by pools of water that reflected the dancing lights above. And on that platform, sitting in what could only be described as a throne, was the most remarkable creature Jake had ever seen. She was clearly Zephyrian, but unlike any of the soldiers or workers Jake had encountered. Where they were dark and hard, she was graceful and elegant. Her shell-like skin had a pearl-like quality that reflected the soft light of the room. Instead of the cold black eyes of the other aliens, hers were a deep blue color that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. She was wearing something that was part clothing and part living armor. It moved with her breathing and seemed to be connected to the throne and the room itself. Long, flowing extensions that might have been hair or decorative appendages moved gently around her shoulders. Jake realized he was looking at Queen Zarathis, the ruler of the entire Zephyrian Empire. He had seen pictures of her in intelligence briefings, but they had not prepared him for meeting her in person. She radiated a kind of power that was different from the military authority of Commander Vexthar. This was the power of someone who had ruled for centuries and commanded the loyalty of billions. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Jake stood frozen in the doorway of the transport tube, afraid to step forward but unable to step back. The queen sat perfectly still on her throne, her blue eyes studying him with an expression he could not read. Finally, Queen Zarathis spoke. Her voice was nothing like the flat, emotionless tones of the other Zephyrians. It was musical and rich with harmonics that seemed to resonate in Jake's chest. "How interesting," she said slowly. "In 300 years of ruling this empire, no uninvited guest has ever found their way into my private chambers. The security systems that protect this place are among the most advanced in the galaxy. Yet here stands a human, alone and unarmed, in the heart of my domain." Jake swallowed hard and tried to find his voice. "Your Majesty, I didn't mean to come here. I was just trying to escape from your guards, and I found a transport tube and you activated a system that should only respond to members of the royal family," the queen finished for him. "Most curious indeed." She rose from her throne with fluid grace and walked down from the platform. As she moved closer, Jake could see that she was even more impressive up close. She was tall, even for a Zephyrian, and carried herself with the confidence of absolute authority. "What is your name, human?" she asked. "Lieutenant Jake Morrison, Your Majesty." "Earth Colonial Fleet?" "Jake Morrison," she repeated, as if testing how the name sounded. "And tell me, Jake Morrison, how does a simple human soldier find his way past security systems that have kept out armies and assassins?" Jake thought about the question. He could lie and make up some story, but something about the Queen's presence made him want to tell the truth. "I don't know, Your Majesty. I was just trying to survive. I went places your guards didn't expect me to go, and I did things they weren't prepared for. I guess I got lucky." Queen Zarathis made a sound that might have been laughter. "Lucky? How very human. My people do not believe in luck, Jake Morrison. We believe in order, planning, and predictable outcomes. Yet here you are, proving that the universe still has room for the unexpected." She walked around Jake slowly, studying him like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. But her gaze was not cold or threatening like the others. It was curious, almost friendly. "My guards are searching for you," she said. "They believe you are a dangerous terrorist who must be captured or killed. They do not understand that you are something much more interesting. You are proof that the universe is not as orderly as we pretend it to be." Jake felt a strange mix of fear and hope. He was still a prisoner, still trapped on an enemy ship. But for the first time since his capture, he was talking to someone who seemed to see him as more than just an enemy to be destroyed. "What happens now?" Jake asked. Queen Zarathis smiled, and Jake realized it was the first smile he had seen from any Zephyrian. "Now, Jake Morrison, we talk. You have given me something I have not had in a very long time. You have given me a surprise. And in return, I will give you something equally rare. I will give you my time and my attention. We have much to discuss, you and I." She gestured toward a smaller platform with comfortable-looking seats. "Please sit. Tell me about your world, your people, and how you came to be here. I find myself very curious about the species that produces individuals capable of such creativity." Jake walked slowly toward the seats, still hardly believing what was happening. An hour ago, he had been a fugitive hiding in maintenance tunnels. Now he was having a conversation with the most powerful being in the Zephyrian Empire. As he sat down across from the Queen, Jake realized that his escape had led him to something far more important than freedom. It had led him to a chance that might change everything. Jake sat carefully on the strange seat across from Queen Zarathis. The chair seemed to adjust itself to his body, becoming more comfortable than anything he had experienced in days. The Queen watched him with those remarkable blue eyes, waiting for him to speak. "I'm not sure where to start," Jake said honestly. "This is not exactly what I expected when I woke up this morning." "Begin with your world," the Queen said. "Tell me about Earth." "My military commanders describe it as a chaotic place filled with weak, emotional creatures. But you do not seem weak, Jake Morrison, and your emotions seem to give you strength rather than make you vulnerable." Jake thought about how to explain Earth to someone who had never been there. Earth is complicated. We have many different countries and cultures. People who look different, think different, believe different things. Sometimes we fight with each other, but most of the time we find ways to work together. Multiple cultures on one world? Queen Zarathis seemed surprised. "How do you maintain order? Who makes the final decisions?" "We have different systems in different places," Jake explained. "Some places have kings or presidents. Others have councils or parliaments. People vote for their leaders in many countries. It's not always efficient, but it gives everyone a voice." The Queen was quiet for a long moment. "Voting," she repeated slowly. "The people choose their own rulers. This is a concept I have heard of but never truly understood. In my empire, leadership is determined by birth and proven ability. The idea that common citizens could select their leaders seems chaotic." "It can be messy," Jake agreed. "But it also means that leaders have to listen to what people want. They can't just give orders and expect to be obeyed forever." "And this system works? Your world has not collapsed into anarchy?" Jake smiled. "We've had our problems, but we're still here. Actually, I think the diversity makes us stronger. When we face a problem, we have lots of different people thinking about solutions. Someone usually comes up with an idea that works." Queen Zarathis leaned forward slightly. "Tell me more about this diversity. How can having many different approaches be better than having one perfect system?" "Well," Jake said, trying to find the right words, "imagine you're trying to solve a difficult puzzle. If you have 10 people who all think the same way, they might all get stuck on the same wrong answer. But if you have 10 people who think differently, one of them might see something the others missed." "Like how you escaped from our perfectly designed prison," the Queen observed. "Exactly. Your security system was designed to stop prisoners who would act like Zephyrians. But I don't think like a Zephyrian, so I did things your system wasn't prepared for." The Queen was quiet again, and Jake could see that she was thinking deeply about what he had said. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost sad. "For 3 centuries, I have ruled an empire based on order and predictability. Every world we conquer is reorganized according to our principles. Every species we encounter is expected to adapt to our ways or be destroyed. It has been efficient, but—" She paused as if she was not sure she should continue. "But," Jake prompted gently. "But it has also been empty," she finished. "There are no surprises anymore, Jake Morrison. No new ideas, no unexpected discoveries. My empire has become like a vast machine that produces exactly what it is supposed to produce. Nothing more and nothing less." Jake felt a surge of sympathy for this powerful being, who seemed so lonely. That sounds like a heavy burden to carry alone. Alone, the Queen repeated. Yes, that is exactly what it is. I make decisions that affect billions of lives, but I make them alone. I have advisors, but they only tell me what they think I want to hear. I have no friends, no equals, no one who challenges my thinking. What about your family? Don't you have children or relatives who could share the responsibility? Queen Zarathus made a sound that was definitely laughter, but there was no humor in it. Zephyrian royalty does not reproduce the way other species do. I was created to be queen, and when my time ends, another will be created to replace me. I have no family in the way humans understand the concept. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. That sounds incredibly lonely. It is the price of absolute power, the Queen said. Or so I've always believed. But talking to you makes me wonder if there might be other ways to live. Before Jake could respond, a loud alarm began sounding throughout the chamber. Red lights flashed on the walls, and Jake could hear the distant sound of running feet and shouting voices. They have found us, Queen Zarathus said calmly. The door to the chamber burst open, and Commander Vexthar stormed in with a squad of heavily armed guards. His black eyes were filled with rage as he saw Jake sitting comfortably next to the Queen. Your Majesty, Vexthar said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Step away from the human prisoner. He is dangerous and unstable. We will execute him immediately. You will do no such thing, Queen Zarathus said, rising from her seat. Her voice carried absolute authority, and Jake could see the guards hesitate. But Your Majesty, this creature has caused chaos throughout the ship. He has damaged our systems and made fools of our security forces. He cannot be allowed to live. Commander Vexthar, the Queen said coldly, are you questioning my judgment? The commander took a step back. Of course not, Your Majesty. But surely you cannot trust this alien. He is our enemy. Is he? The Queen asked. Or is he simply someone we have chosen to see as an enemy because it is easier than trying to understand him? Jake watched the exchange with fascination. He could see the struggle in Commander Vexthar's expression. The alien was clearly loyal to his queen, but he could not understand why she was protecting a human prisoner. Your Majesty, Vexthar said carefully, this human's presence here violates every security protocol we have. If word of this spreads, it could be seen as weakness, or it could be seen as strength, the Queen replied. The strength to change course when circumstances require it. She turned to Jake, and he could see something new in her eyes. It looked like determination. Jake Morrison, she said formally, I hereby grant you diplomatic immunity as my personal advisor on human affairs. You are under my direct protection. The silence that followed was deafening. Commander Vexthar's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The guards looked confused and uncertain. Your Majesty, Vexthar finally managed to say, what you are suggesting is unprecedented. The Council will never accept it. The Council serves at my pleasure, Queen Zarathus said firmly. As do you, Commander. You will inform the crew that our human guest is to be treated with respect and courtesy. Anyone who harms him will answer to me personally. Jake stood up slowly, hardly believing what he was hearing. A few hours ago, he had been a hunted fugitive. Now he was apparently a diplomatic advisor to the ruler of an enemy empire. Your Majesty, he said carefully, I'm honored by your trust, but I should point out that I'm just a lieutenant. I don't have any authority to negotiate on behalf of Earth. Queen Zarathus smiled again, and Jake realized he was beginning to like that expression. Perhaps not, Jake Morrison, but you have something more valuable than authority. You have perspective. You have shown me that there are other ways to think about problems, other ways to see the universe. She turned back to Commander Vexthar. Send a message to the Zephyrian High Council. Tell them that I am considering new approaches to our relationship with the human worlds, and prepare a communication channel to Earth. I wish to speak with their leaders. Your Majesty, Vexthar said desperately, the war has been going on for years. Millions have died on both sides. You cannot simply decide to make peace with our enemies. I am the Queen, Zarathus said simply. I can decide whatever I choose to decide. The question is whether I should. She looked at Jake, and he could see the weight of her decision in her eyes. What do you think, Jake Morrison? Is peace between our peoples possible? Or are we too different to ever understand each other? Jake took a deep breath. He thought about his dead crewmates, about all the soldiers on both sides who had died in this war. He thought about the fear and hatred that had grown, between humans and Zephyrians over the years, but he also thought about the conversation he had just had with the Queen. She was nothing like what he had expected from the enemy leader. She was thoughtful, curious, and capable of changing her mind when presented with new information. "I think it's possible," Jake said finally. "It won't be easy and it won't happen quickly. But if we can find common ground, if we can learn to see each other as people instead of enemies." "Yes, I think peace is possible," Queen Zarathis nodded slowly. "Then we shall try, Jake Morrison. We shall try to build something new from the ashes of this old war." The next few weeks aboard the Hive Sovereign were unlike anything Jake could have imagined. Queen Zarathis had been serious about making him her advisor, and she gave him quarters near her own chambers. They were comfortable rooms with real windows that showed the stars outside, a luxury Jake had not expected. Commander Vexthar was not happy about the arrangement. Jake could see the anger in the aliens' black eyes whenever they met in the hallways, but the commander followed his queen's orders, and gradually the rest of the crew began to accept Jake's presence on the ship. Jake spent hours each day talking with Queen Zarathis about human culture, history, and values. She was incredibly intelligent and asked questions that forced Jake to think deeply about things he had always taken for granted. "Tell me about human art," she said one day as they sat in her chambers. "My studies suggest that humans spend considerable time and resources creating things that have no practical purpose." "Why?" Jake thought about how to explain this to someone whose entire culture was focused on efficiency and order. "Art helps us express feelings and ideas that we can't put into words. It connects us to each other and helps us understand our place in the universe. But it serves no function in warfare or survival," the Queen observed. "Maybe that's exactly why it's important," Jake said. "Not everything valuable has to be about fighting or staying alive. Sometimes the most important things are the ones that make life worth living." Queen Zarathis was quiet for a long moment. "In 300 years of rule, I have never created anything beautiful. I have built ships and conquered worlds, but I have never made something simply because it brought joy." "It's not too late to start," Jake said gently. These conversations began to change both of them. Jake learned that the Zephyrians were not the emotionless monsters he had been taught to fear. They were a proud, ancient people who had chosen order and efficiency because their homeworld had been harsh and unforgiving. Their rigid society had helped them survive and thrive, but it had also cut them off from much of what made life meaningful. Queen Zarathis, meanwhile, began to see humans not as chaotic primitives, but as a species that had found different solutions to the same basic problems of existence. Their diversity and apparent disorder were actually sources of strength and creativity. "Your people fascinate me," she told Jake one evening. "You fight among yourselves constantly, yet you also cooperate in ways my people cannot. You create art and music and stories, yet you are also capable of remarkable technological achievements. You are contradictions, all of you. Maybe that's what makes us human," Jake replied. "We don't fit into neat categories. We're complicated." "Yes," the Queen agreed. "Complicated and wonderful." While Jake and the Queen were building their understanding, Commander Vexithar was growing more frustrated. He had sent several messages to the Zephyrian High Council, reporting on the Queen's strange behavior and her relationship with the human prisoner. The responses he received were increasingly concerned. Finally, Vexithar could stand it no longer. He requested a private meeting with Queen Zarathis and spoke his mind. "Your Majesty, the High Council is questioning your judgment. They believe the human has somehow influenced your thinking in dangerous ways. They are discussing the possibility of removing you from command." Queen Zarathis looked at him calmly. "Are they? And what do you think, Commander? Do you believe I have been compromised?" Vexthar struggled with his answer. "I think you have changed, Your Majesty. You are not the same leader you were before the human arrived." "You are correct," the Queen said. "I have changed. I have learned that there are other ways to see the universe, other approaches to the problems we face. This knowledge has made me a better leader, not a worse one. But the war, Your Majesty, we have been fighting the humans for years. Millions of our people have died. We cannot simply forget that and make peace." "We cannot forget the past," the Queen agreed, "but we can choose to build a different future. Jake has shown me that it is possible." At that moment, Jake entered the chamber. He had been invited to join the conversation, though he was not sure why. "Commander Vexthar," Queen Zarathis said, "I want you to listen to a proposal that Jake and I have been developing. It may sound impossible, but I ask you to consider it with an open mind. Jake stepped forward nervously. He had been working on this idea for days, but he was not sure how the commander would react. "Commander," Jake began, "what if instead of fighting each other, our peoples could learn from each other? Humans could benefit from Zephyrian technology and organization. Zephyrians could benefit from human creativity and adaptability." "Impossible," Vexthar said immediately. "Our species are too different. We could never trust each other." "We're different," Jake agreed. "But maybe that's exactly why we need each other. Your people are incredibly good at building efficient, organized systems, but sometimes those systems become so rigid that they can't adapt to new situations. Humans are good at finding new solutions to old problems. And humans," Queen Zarathis added, "are excellent at cooperation despite their differences, something my people have never mastered. We follow orders well, but we struggle to work together as equals." Commander Vexithar looked back and forth between them. "You are talking about ending a war that has consumed both our civilizations. The military leaders on both sides will never accept it." "Then we don't start with the military leaders," Jake said. "We start with smaller groups, scientists, engineers, artists, teachers, people who are more interested in building things than destroying them. A cultural exchange program," Queen Zarathis explained. "Small groups from each species living and working together on neutral ground, learning from each other, building trust slowly." "It would take years," Vexthar protested. "Maybe decades." "Yes," the Queen said. "But the alternative is continuing to fight until one of us destroys the other completely." "Is that really a better option?" For the first time since Jake had met him, Commander Vexthar seemed uncertain. The alien was clearly struggling with ideas that went against everything he had been taught. "If we did this," he said slowly, "how would we even begin? The hatred between our peoples runs deep." Jake had been thinking about this problem for weeks. "We start with me," he said. "I'm already here, already working with Queen Zarathis. When I return to Earth, I can tell my people what I've learned, that Zephyrians are not monsters, that peace is possible. And I," Queen Zarathis added, "will select a small group of Zephyrians to accompany Jake back to Earth. Volunteers who are willing to risk their lives for the chance of peace. You would send our people into the heart of enemy territory?" Vexthar asked. "I would send brave souls to build bridges where there have only been walls," the Queen replied. Over the following days, Commander Vexithar watched as Jake and Queen Zarathis worked together to refine their plans. He saw how the humans' ideas challenged and improved the Queen's thinking, and how her wisdom helped Jake understand the complexities of galactic politics. Slowly, reluctantly, Vexthar began to believe that their plan might actually work. 6 months after his capture, Jake stood on the bridge of a Zephyrian ship approaching Earth. But this time he was not a prisoner. He was an ambassador, carrying with him a message of hope and the possibility of peace. Beside him stood 3 Zephyrian volunteers, including Commander Vexthar himself. The commander had ultimately decided that the risk of trying for peace was worth taking, even if it meant challenging everything he had believed about humans. Queen Zarathis had remained behind to begin the delicate process of convincing her own people that peace was possible. It would not be easy, but she was determined to try. As Earth grew larger in the view screen, Jake thought about how much his life had changed. A year ago, he had been a simple soldier following orders. Now he was helping to shape the future of 2 civilizations. "Are you nervous?" Commander Vexthar asked. Jake smiled. "Terrified," he admitted, "but also excited. We're about to do something that has never been done before." "Yes," Vexthar agreed. "Something unprecedented, something impossible, something human," Jake added. As their ship entered Earth's atmosphere, Jake could see the lights of cities spreading across the planet's surface. Each light represented people going about their daily lives, unaware that their future was about to change forever. Jake had started this journey as a prisoner running from alien guards. He was ending it as a bridge between 2 worlds, carrying with him the hope that even the greatest enemies could become friends if they were willing to see each other not as monsters, but as people. The ship touched down at a military base outside Geneva, where representatives from Earth's major governments were waiting to hear what Jake had learned during his time with the Zephyrians. As Jake walked down the ship's ramp with his former enemies beside him, He thought about Queen Zarathus and her determination to build something new from the ashes of the old war. It would not be easy. There would be setbacks and disappointments, fear and mistrust to overcome. But for the first time in years, Jake felt genuine hope for the future. Humans and Zephyrians were different in many ways, but they shared the same basic desire for peace, security, and meaning in their lives. If they could learn to see past their differences and focus on their common goals, anything was possible.